Hey, what's going on, guys? Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join me for another army creation video. If you're just joining us for the first time, my name is Jordan, also known as JmonsterTW, and I am one of the Balin developers working on 3rd Age Reforged, a competitive multiplayer mod for Medieval 2. If you guys are interested in finding a little bit more about the mod, you can find all the links to our various media down in the description. You can find our Discord server, our ModDB page, everything that you need to get started. But in any case, the army that we're going to be looking at today is the Dwarves of Khazad-dum. It's about time we had a Dwarven faction, so we're going to be looking at one of the most heavy infantry focused of the two Dwarven factions, who obviously both have a focus on heavy infantry, but Khazad-dum really kicks that up to 11. So without any further ado, let's get started. Alright, now let's begin with talking a little bit about what makes the Dwarves of Khazad-dum so potent as infantrymen. Now, one of the really important, but not necessarily unique to Khazad-dum features is that Dwarven units can upgrade their armor for half the cost. It only costs 25 instead of 50 to upgrade their armor, which is a pretty good money saver and can be used to great effect in buffing up some of your low tier units and some of your higher tier ones as well. A lot of the Khazad-dum units are able to upgrade their armor, which really makes a big difference. It gives them 2 extra armor instead of the 1 that it shows you on the unit card, so that is something to bear in mind. The other is that their armor values and attack values across the board are quite high, as is their morale. They've got really good shield as well, so the Dwarves of Khazad-dum are not going to be easily felled from range, and once you close into melee, you're really going to have to rely on higher damage units to do their work. Now, one of the big downsides, I suppose, to playing as the Dwarves is that you've got a little bit lower melee defense because so many of their units are going to be armed with axes or other units that in Reforged have an inherent melee defense penalty. Got some hammers of good and bad over here who have some pretty low skill as well. 2nd Legion Axemen, 8 skill, again, -2 from the axe that they have there. And then, of course, the pikemen who have about 4. So that's a little bit of a downside, but it does kind of mitigate the fact that the Dwarves of Khazad-dum have such high armor values. The other big downside to playing as the Dwarves of Khazad-dum is that you don't have a lot of cavalry options. Now, you do have access to mercenary cavalry, and the bonus to upgrading their armor does extend to them as well, so it only costs you 25. That's not unique to Khazad-dum, however, all mercenary cavalry units can be upgraded in this fashion. I think that's because they're stored under the Dwarven roster in the EDU, so that's sort of just how that ended up working out, but I think it's a good thing since the mercenary cavalry is supposed to be a cost-efficient answer. But in any case, yes, you are limited to just a few units of mercenary cavalry, although it is worth it, I think, when playing as the Dwarves of Khazad-dum, especially against a cavalry-heavy force, to go a little bit into the red. You can get a 3rd unit there for about 890, which is not bad. The first 2 units are fairly cheap at only 650 when fully upgraded like this, and it is worth it. They've got numbers, they've got damage, and they've got a little bit of extra buffs coming down the pipe for them as well, +1, I believe, to cavalry, and +1 in melee skill. So they're even more worth it than ever. So yeah, something else to keep in mind. Now, they do have access to mercenary crossbows. I don't think anyone else has access to these guys. I don't know if... maybe Cardalin might. Cardalin probably has access to the mercenary. No, they do not. I think that the Dwarves of Khazad-dum are the only remaining faction that is able to use the mercenary crossbowmen. So they can be very, very useful, but of course, being a short-range crossbow unit, even more short-range since they are mounted bowmen and crossbowmen tend to be a little bit shorter on the range to balance out that extra little bit of mobility. The result is that these guys can be quite vulnerable to foot archers and even to other crossbows. The benefit to bringing them, however, is that you get a lot of damage here. 12 missile damage on some very swift crossbow units that can really put the hurt onto a lot of heavy cavalry units in the game and really take the pressure off of Khazad-dum when it comes to dealing with mounted enemies. So it is definitely worth it, and we'll actually experiment with making an army that has a very solid complement of mercenaries, probably to the tune of about these 3 units here. The mercenary cav, well upgraded, and a couple units of mercenary crossbowmen. You got a lot of money left there to do with as you please. But yeah, so let's take a look at some of the possible army combinations with Khazad-dum. We're going to do some traditional ones, like a balanced army, and then we'll do some more off-meta things just to show you that there is a little bit of flexibility here with Khazad-dum's admittedly fairly trim roster. But in any case, let's get started. So, let's say we were, for example, going to be going up against the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. We wanted to really focus on both Inspire units and having a lot of numbers and a fair amount of AP damage as well that will do very, very well against the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. So I would say that the Legion Bodyguard would be important, as would potentially any of these Inspire units down here. No, I think all of these units Inspire, except for the Guards of Khazad-dûm. So I would bring a unit of Sons of the Fallen just to give a little bit of extra staying power to some of the lower tier units that we're going to be bringing. So we're going to have 3 units here of the Dwarven miners. You could also back that up with some mercenary guildsmen, although I don't think it's all that worth it in this case. We'll go for something a little bit more cost effective maybe, and use my warriors of Khazad-dûm, 3 of them. I'm going to back them up with some Khazad-dûm sentries, who I don't think can have an armor upgrade. So we'll take a couple Khazad-dûm sentries right there, and we'll use them to hold down our center. Now we're going to want to have some hard-hitting infantry as well. I think that the Khazad-dûm reclaimers are a big part of that. One of the things to note about the Khazad-dûm reclaimers, however, is that after the Great Throne attribute apocalypse, essentially, that's removed a lot of javelin units' abilities and thrown hand-throw projectile units' abilities to massacre Momakill. These guys actually kept the throne trait, so this is an excellent hard counter to Momakill. So if you're going to be coming up against Harad, I recommend at least one of the units of the Khazad-dûm reclaimers, because they can do a lot of work for you. And after the fact as well, I mean, they're 13 AP damage axe infantry, so they can do a lot of work after they use up their fairly formidable store of hand-thrown projectiles. I think they still have 4. They might only have 3 though. But again, we're going to be playing against the Misty Mountains. Let's move on here. And we're only going to take maybe 1 or 2 units of the Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm, just because Misty Mountains tends to rush in my experience. They tend to really focus on being very aggressive, especially early on. Bring a lot of trolls. Misty Mountain's going to be able to bring more trolls than anybody else, and I expect a lot of Misty players to take advantage of that. So let's only bring a couple units of Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm, and that's just to deal with any missile infantry that the goblins might bring. Now we have to move on to some more hard-hitting units with a little bit more staying power. So we've got an interesting choice here between the Hammers of Gundabad and the 2nd Legion Axe Guard. The 2nd Legion are a little bit more expensive, but they can have their armor upgraded, unlike the Hammers of Gundabad. And they've got higher damage and higher melee skill as well. The key differences between these two is the armor disparity and the fact that I believe the Hammers of Gundabad are locked morale. And they can also deploy stakes, but might not be as useful since cavalry is generally pretty good. When you're playing against players, they're generally pretty good at avoiding stakes. Occasionally you see the odd miss micro, and it's really funny for everybody involved, but for the most part, cavalry is pretty good at avoiding them, so that's not always going to be very useful for you unless you really plan to dig in your heels against a cavalry-heavy opponent. So in this case, I think I'm going to opt for a couple units of 2nd Legion Axe Guard. Now, something possibly to pad our numbers a little bit here. We're definitely going to need some more infantry for the front line, so let's bring... I wonder which one of these would be a good addition to the front line. We could bring some mercenary guildsmen. They're a little bit cheaper, and we'd be able to get 2 of them. I don't know if we could get... No, we wouldn't be able to get another 2 units of warriors of Khazad-dûm. So we've got a lot of our ranged and frontline needs kind of taken care of here, and some heavy hitting infantry as well. We could bring a 3rd unit of the Khazad-dûm Axe Guard, and then use our money left over to upgrade our units, which is entirely possible. All 2nd Legion units can be upgraded, and it really does add a lot to their value. Or we could bring, a couple units of extra fodder to maybe hold up some of the Misty Mountains units. The Mercenary Guildsmen will do reasonably well, and we've got enough morale buffing units here, I think, to really kind of keep them in line. But instead, we have some numbers from the Dwarven miners, so let's go for another company there on the 2nd Legion Axe Guard. Very, very nasty. We're going to fully upgrade them, and then we'll give some attack upgrades to the rest of our units here. And there you have it. You've got a decent little army here, with some solid numbers, some good inspire, and a lot of upgrades for dealing with the pesky goblins of the Misty Mountains. There you go. And then you got 25 left over, which I think can be given to the Legion Bodyguard. Yes, indeed, they can be upgraded. So there you have it. A solid force with a lot of numbers, a lot of skirmish power, and a fair amount of staying power in melee, and a ton of AP to throw around as well. So not too bad. Let's go with something a little bit more... something that Khazad-dûm can use to kind of make up for their weakness, and that really tends to be their cavalry and how slow moving they are. So let's go with the mercenary heavy army here that we spoke of a little bit earlier. We are going to pad our front line with some cheaper units here, but how cheap we really want to go. Mercenary Guildsmen, no, we're going to go with the Warriors of Khazad-dûm. A couple sentries there to pad the front line and ward off any cavalry charges from the front. A couple 4th Legion Spear Guard, who are very, very strong. And we're actually going to upgrade them as well. We're going to give ourselves some ranged firepower. Very useful indeed. And what else do we have here? We could give ourselves a couple units of Sons of the Fallen, but that might be a little bit too many spears. So let's go with a couple Axe Guard and a single company of Sons of the Fallen. We could swap this out if you really wanted to for a Dwarven Catapult. We'd have to get rid of one of the upgrades on one of the units, but that's fine. And the Dwarven Catapult is an interesting little tool. It's got a little bit less ammunition than your average catapult unit. I think it's got about 4 less ammunition, but its projectile type is a little bit more, I want to say versatile. I mean, most people, they see a catapult and they're like, oh, well, that might be a problem. But occasionally, you know, you'll see a catapult like miss 5 shots out of 6 or something like that. The Dwarven Catapult is a little bit more, I want to say, accurate in the sense that it can throw 3 projectiles at the same time. They don't all do as much damage as a regular catapult shot, although if they all hit at the same time, they will. But it is a very effective terror tool for making people come to you, especially if you're playing against somebody who's not as familiar with the mod as well, or maybe somebody who's not really expecting it. The catapult can be a deadly, deadly tool indeed. But in this instance, we're not going to go for the catapult because it is a little bit more situational. If your opponent wants to sit back and wait out the catapult storm, then that is a very viable strategy, and you can really minimize the amount of damage that catapult can do by just spreading your units out. And it's not like the Dwarves of Khazad-dûm have a ton of power projection over a long distance. So, with that in mind, we're going to take a unit of Sons of the Fallen, and we're going to use the leftover money to upgrade our units a little bit further. And we're going to put our general in the Sons of the Fallen, where he will be well protected. We've got a lot of ranged firepower here, a lot of options for dealing with enemy cavalry, and your lower tier units are quite effective against, let's say you're playing as Rohan, for example. A lot of the Khazad-dûm units are going to be able to deal with the Rohirrim infantry fairly efficiently, and you've got a lot of other utility here as well in the form of the Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm, who can be quite formidable in melee. They should not be underestimated. They can do a lot of work. And, of course, they bring their bows as well, which can be very, very useful at potentially making your opponent come to you, dealing with some of their more lighter armed infantry, and inflicting damage on their cavalry as well to try and even out that cavalry fight in your favor. But yeah, not bad. Let's see. Let's try Khazad-dûm in a siege. We'll see what that would look like. Well, if you're going to be digging in a lot, you're probably going to want to bring some of your pike units. Now, in this case, I would even bring a couple units of 1st Legion pikes. They are expensive, but damn, are they powerful. They've got a shield value, they've got 12 armor, and a fair amount of skill for a pike unit as well. So not something that you want to underestimate. Definitely one of the finer pike units in the game. But you're going to want to be backing them up with something, I suppose. So let's go for maybe some more heavy-hitting infantry. The 3rd Legion infantry. Now, because we are going for some of the more expensive mid-tiers, we will have to cheap out a little bit on our elite units. And something else to note in a siege, you may or may not have a little bit less money, so you may be able to do a little bit more with your budget than what you're going to see in this video. But we're going to assume that everybody is going to be playing on more or less the same playing field here with a standard 13k budget that we balance the game around. And if you're playing in an equal number siege, well, that's a totally viable thing to have. You can have a fairly balanced siege where everybody has the same money, in my opinion, although if you're going to deviate from that a little bit, I don't recommend going too far. 10 to 15% for whichever side has the bigger disadvantage and that sort of thing. But in any case, I just wanted to throw that in there just as a little bit of an aside. But yeah, so we're going to cheap out a little bit on our elites in this case because we're bringing so many of the more deadly mid-tier units and some of the higher tier non-HP elites for Khazad-dûm. Let's see here. You want more pikes, might not be necessary. A couple of Khazad-dûm Reclaimers will really do a lot of work in a siege situation. Dwarven Catapult might be useful to have as well, but you're also going to want to try and pad your numbers a little bit. So a couple units of Dwarven Miners as well, because they can do a lot of damage, and they do have fairly high morale as well. They can stick around in a fight for a long time. They can be useful for blunting charges, for example. If you have a cavalry unit charging down a street or something at you, and you need to throw something in their way so that they don't hit some of your more vulnerable, expensive units, like the 3rd Legion Infantry, well, you can throw a unit of Dwarven Miners under the bus, and it's only 450 florins, so it's not a huge loss for you. But in any case, let's bring a couple Orc Hunters there as well to supplement our skirmish line. Orc Hunters, really bringing them in 2 isn't necessarily ideal, but they do have a little bit higher missile damage than a lot of the other higher tier bowmen in the game, so there's something to kind of keep in mind. They do have like elven low tier missile damage just to give Khazad-dûm something at range that has a little more teeth. But let's move on now. Hammers of good, any kind of unit that can be locked morale is going to be really useful in a siege. You can use them to clog up a choke point for a really long time. They get a little bit higher mass, I think, than no, their mass is the same as the 2nd Legion Axe Guard, but because they have this higher mass and these higher numbers, I would probably bring them in a siege, maybe over the Axe Guard. It really depends, but in this case I'm going to be bringing a couple units of them. And let's see, we definitely need some numbers, so let's go for, oops, can't do that, another couple units there of the Warriors of Khazad-dûm. We could bring another unit of miners if we really wanted to, or we could just kind of put an end to it, bring a unit of Legion Bodyguard, bring a 3rd unit of miners. Very heavy hitting, very heavy infantry focused, really a lot more of a support army. You could use these to hold down some final choke points. Because of your lower numbers, it may be useful to hold the Dwarves of Khazad-dûm in reserve until that sort of situation arises, when you really need some strong last stand troops. So there you go. It's a possible siege army. Let's do one more, something that's a little bit more, let's say, traditional. So a little bit more bowmen. We'll take 1 unit there of the Khazad-dûm Reclaimers instead of 2, and we'll kind of go for a bit more of a numbers approach here. So let's take 1, 2, 3 Sentries of Khazad-dûm, back them up, some strong mid tiers. Couple units of Sons of the Fallen who are locked morale as well, very difficult to dislodge. 2nd Legion Axe Guard, and there you have it. Something with a little bit more numbers, a little bit less focus on its skirmish units. Not a catapult in this one, but that's all right. And there's a little bit less militia tier units as well in the form of the Dwarven Miners. So if you didn't like that last army, maybe this one's a little bit more your speed on the standard 13k budget. But yeah, there you go. So let's try something off meta. Something that I've always wanted to try with the Dwarves of Khazad-dûm, but I haven't really had the occasion to do so up until this point. So let's do something skirmish heavy. Let's go with a skirmish heavy Khazad-dûm army. So we're going to start with standard complement here. 2 companies of Mercenary Cavalry and a couple units of Mercenary Crossbowmen. Going to bring the full complement of our skirmish units, so 3 units of Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm and some Khazad-dûm Reclaimers. Now we're really going to have to go cheap on our infantry for this, so oops. There you have it. A smaller front line so far, but we'll find some ways to augment that a little bit. I think that some Inspire units are going to be important here, though they are quite expensive, so maybe that's not the best idea. Let's see, what else do we have here that we could use as a skirmishing force? Now we could go for a catapult or a ballista, but I'm envisioning this as a field battle, and artillery is of fairly limited use in a field battle. So let's bring some things that are capable of holding a line for an extended period. So a couple companies there are the Sons of the Fallen for putting on the flank of the infantry block, composed of Khazad-dûm warriors and Khazad-dûm sentries. And then let's see, 675. We could bring ourselves a unit of 3rd Legion infantry, and what the heck, stick our general in there as well. We'll use him as a reserve unit. Now, yeah, there you have it, a skirmish-heavy Khazad-dûm army, which is not your standard fare by any means, but you have a lot of AP missiles and a lot of skirmishing power as well. So if maybe you wanted to, say, if for some reason you wanted to engage the elves in a skirmish fight, this would be a fairly decent army, I think, to do that with, although the mercenary companies would be a little bit more vulnerable to elven counterfire. It could be decent against Dale. You've still got some fairly heavily armored archers here. The Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm are at least as tanky as the Gondor archers before they are upgraded, and they are definitely more deadly in melee. And then the Warriors of Khazad-dûm have 7 armor and 8 shields, so they're not gonna fall to archer fire anytime soon. And then finally, the Sons of the Fallen, 14 armor, 8 shield. They're not going anywhere, and neither are the 3rd Legion infantry. So you can do a lot of damage at range with this army while being fairly comfortable in being able to soak any range fire that may come your way. So if you're fighting against an opponent that's a little bit more skirmish heavy and a little bit less about their cavalry, well then maybe this is going to be a useful army for you. Like I said, it's off meta, it's not necessarily going to be applicable in every battle that you play, but I think it's a cool direction to take Khazad-dûm in, and it really kind of shows that there is some flexibility here. We've got a lot of options when it comes to Khazad-dûm. But let's try one more. One more that is absolutely crazy as a slower moving faction. We are going to make a Khazad-dûm rush army. So we're going to take a couple, we're going to take some Dwarven miners, we're going to take some hammers of Gundabad, and this is going to be like our core kind of infantry here. And we're going to back them up with some Khazad-dûm reclaimers, a couple companies of the Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm, just so we have a ranged presence, but we don't want to invest too much into it, because we are going to need our money elsewhere. So a couple companies there of the Mercenary Cavalry. I'd even go as far as to bring 3 of them, but we'll see. And what else? What else is going to be a useful addition here? I think 2nd Legion Shield Guard would be nice to have. A 3rd company of Mercenary Crossbowmen could then be added. And then let's see here. Now we could bring a couple units there of 3rd Legion Infantry to support the 4th Legion Bodyguard and to act as a little bit more of a front line, something that can get stuck in once the shock infantry is there. And then we've got a lot of money left over, and we are going to spend that on the Mercenary Cavalry, because the Rush Army, in my opinion, lives or dies by the amount of cavalry that it can bring and how effectively it can deal with opposing fast-moving units like cavalry, and especially lancers. And let's see. We're going to want to put our general somewhere where he's going to be reasonably safe. Now, I don't expect the Khazad-dûm Orc Hunters to be taking a lot of fire early on, and by the late to mid game, who's going to win is going to be decided basically by how the infantry fight goes. So I don't mind putting the Orc Hunters there. The Khazad-dûm units generally have high enough morale that the general can be left back, and they'll still do pretty well for themselves. 15 morale is nothing to sneeze at. And then, yeah, you've got some nasty mid-range pressure here as well, and a ton of really heavily armored, deadly shock troops. I would even add a little bit more armor to these Khazad-dûm 2nd Legion X-Guard here, and then maybe give some extra damage. Who do I want to give that to? I would give it to the Khazad-dûm Reclaimers. They'll probably get engaged in melee pretty quickly, and there you have it. A Khazad-dûm Rush army that's not quite as awful as you would think it would be, just hearing the idea out loud. But in any case, hope you guys have found this video instructive so far. That's going to be the end of our army comp video for Khazad-dûm. Coming up next is going to be, I think it's going to be another one of the Elven factions, Imladris, who is getting a few changes in the upcoming fix, and yeah, they're going to have some interesting kind of changes coming down the pipe for them. It's going to shake up a little bit how they work, but they're still going to be cavalry focused. Now, I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but if I haven't, and this is going to come out of left field for you guys, but I want to show you one of the cool weather features that's being added in the new patch. This is a little bit of an extra here. So yeah, if you guys don't want to watch that part of the video, it doesn't interest you at all, then go ahead and turn it off now. But in any case, I'll join you guys in just a few moments. So the feature I want to talk to you about is a small one, but one that adds a lot of immersion value to the game. Kuro, at least I think it was Kuro, came across a mod that adds weather effects to your troops, depending on the type of battlefield that you are fighting on. So the more that your troops move around on an icy battlefield, the more covered in snow they will become. The more that they move around and trudge through the muds, the more covered in it they are going to be. If you're fighting in a desert environment, your troops are going to become bespeckled with dust and other debris to be found on the battlefield, and it just adds so much. As you guys can see here, the effects are spectacular, and they get more intense as time goes on. And most importantly, they do not override the blood effects already in the game. So by the end of a battle, your victorious army is going to be mired in blood and muck and dirt, and it's just going to pull you that much further into the world. So yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and this tiny little featurette about what is to come. My name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. I'll see you guys next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.